Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Things We Know. I'm Lisa Callahan.
And I'm Kari Morin.
And we are recording on September 14th. This is the week that Barbie in the Real World with Charlotte Callahan dropped. And if you've listened to that episode, you know that Kari and I talked about the fact that we would probably come back and do a part two that was more tied to the Me Too movement. We're calling this You Too. Not like the band, but like You Too. And I just said immediately after listening to this week's pod with Charlotte that it felt really important to just grab onto what we were feeling, what we were hearing from our listeners about how that resonated. And so here we are. So it's not dropping right after, but we're recording it that same week. Kari, why don't you take it? Like, why did you feel like it was? You knew this when we recorded the pod with Charlotte that you wanted a follow up. So do you remember what you were feeling?
I think because there's so many angles to, and the movie touched on all of it.
Yeah,
I think like all of it. There's a range from like misogyny, sexism, unwanted advances, inappropriate remarks, all the way to sexual violence, right? And the Me Too movement, like just at first glance, sounds like it's about sexual harassment in the workplace, but it is so much more than that. And the Me Too was, to me, like for me, it was the amount of women that like looked at people who were reading these stories, going, "Yeah, of course, I've experienced that." It was like, duh. And I think it was so important to stop at what feels unsafe, even though it's not workplace harassment for someone Charlotte's age, because it's how we become desensitized as we go into the world and become part of it and figure out how to navigate it. So it felt like, let's freeze this and really listen. That was so important to me, that we were all hearing what a 17-year-old navigates and is aware of, and is reflecting back to us that not much has changed.
Yeah.
Just that there's words for it. And then also like what it stirs up, even just talking about it stirred up so much for me, so much for people listening to this week. Watching this movie stirred up so much, where people responded to different parts of it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we can get to all the angles in one episode, and maybe we'll revisit it as we go. But I think, it's the misogyny, it's the sexism, the unwanted attention, the work culture, the public culture, like, being on a train, like Charlotte, right? Going to the store, me walking to the mailbox, right? But then there's also, which we may not get to today, but online culture, like the misogyny online, and how women and men are treated differently, or just for anyone, male or female, to put their work out in the world and to know how differently they get treated, and how that when critique and feedback comes, and this has been, proven in research, so much of what men hear back is about their work, and women, it's almost never about their work. It's about them as a person.
Yeah.
And it's about their sexual identity, or their gender, and all the roles that they must be horrible in, right? Oh, she's probably a horrible mom. She put out a poem, or she wrote a song. Like, why does that make her a bad mom? That kind of thing. So I think it's just the overall, like, we are so far from this being, we know women aren't paid the same, but we also know like they aren't treated the same. And yet so many flourish despite it.
Well, I think you hit on this in the real world, Barbie in the Real World. Two things as you're saying that come to mind. One, it goes back to what I was saying. You said it's important to hear Charlotte's version as a 17-year-old, because that's where we start to get a nerd. And I think that's where I was talking about the callous, right? Like, because you and I have been going through this since maybe we were 13, 14, 15. I mean, I had that, I guess I had sort of a similar experience when I was 15 and I went out to dinner with my dad, and somebody offered me a drink. Like, they thought I was old enough to be his young girlfriend. You know what I mean? And so it wasn't exactly the same as Charlotte's, but so we started building that callus. She's starting to build that callus. And, somebody on Facebook said to me that they didn't feel, she's a dear college friend, and her daughter is just a couple years older than Charlotte. And she said, she was kind of agreeing with you. She's like, I don't think we've done enough. I think Gen X women, we did live through this time of like Roe seemed codified, and yes, we saw Anita Hill, and yes, we saw what Clinton did, but I don't know, we had this like rose-colored glasses, the idea of like, yeah, we did what you said it in the last one, we danced around to get to what we needed to do. And so did we do enough? And so I think, yes, listening to Charlotte tell us straight up, no, we didn't. And then to move through and like, okay, let's recognize where else it's still happening. Because you and I have been having a lot of really interesting reflections from our clients on how it is still showing up, like within the last 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just, it's actually the subtle stuff that's driving me more crazy, weirdly. Obviously.
Like what?
Like obviously, like the sexual violence, sexual assault, inappropriate physical stuff, like that has its own place in hell for me and for everyone, right? Like, and in preparing for this, I went back and watched again Tarana Burke's TED Talk on like how the Me Too movement started, and so I want to address that, like, obviously, this is huge because if 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys get sexually assaulted in a year, right? Like that is. And 84% of trans women, people with disabilities are 7 times more likely, and Indigenous women 3.5 more times. Like this is all alarming, and it should be a halt, because what it is reflecting is that vulnerability for some reason equaled permission, right? And that is not the case, right? So what we want to do is like change the playing field, or at least shine a light on where power and privilege has made this a dangerous world, a dangerous place to go to work. But it's the subtle stuff that leads to this stuff. And so it's the subtle stuff that's driving me crazy. Like your client being told she's too ambitious,
right?
Like my client being told she wasn't the right fit for a project. And then when she wasn't there, they were saying that she had a lot of emotional stuff going on at home. And so they were giving her a break. And that wasn't true. I take exception to that, right? Like, I do not want the fact that if someone knows what's going on in my house and knows that it's hard for me to make decisions about what I can and can't do professionally. You know that about me. Yep. So all of that subtle stuff is done to women. It is not done to men. And you and I have experienced that many times. We're like, being told that you're asking for too much, or that you're, like that what you want is maybe, like maybe you should be more grateful. We don't think men are told that in the workplace as much. So it's the subtle stuff that leads to this stuff that I think desensitizes us to where people get into a really unfair situation, or in worst cases, an unsafe situation.
Well, and my experience with like in the workplace, just because of the industry I've been in for so long, I have worked with men and they are being paid the same as me, or they are being treated the same, but it's not good because it's a woman's focus, or centered, I should say, industry. Right.
Tell me more.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm gonna fuck it. Yeah. Weight Watchers, we all got paid the same. Didn't matter seniority. It didn't matter. We made money based on how many members were in our meetings. And so if you were a good leader, yes, you made more money, but the baseline was exactly the same, no matter whether you were a man or a woman. Most of us were women. Most of us were there to pay it forward, as were the men. But so the men ended up they were paid the same shitty amount we were paid, So it's just interesting to me that when you're in a man can, at least in my experience, I don't know that this is true all the time, but in a woman-centered business or industry, if a man's in it, they may very well get paid the same shit amount. But the point is, it's a shit amount, right? Because we're just lucky to be there because we wanted to pay it forward because we lost weight this way, and so we wanted to help others, and they took advantage of that.
I see that.
That's what I'm talking about.
I've been in, nonprofit, similar kinds of things where everybody, male and female, is underpaid, right? For what, like the time and the amount of hours and the dedication, because there's a mission, right? And you've also heard the backlash, like, their CEOs are making this much. And it's like, why in nonprofit should they not make the same as in for-profit? They're still
Right.
like working just as hard, if not harder. So that's interesting. And yet people understandably want their donation dollars to be mostly going to the cause without
Sure.
realizing it takes humans to make that cause, get addressed. So I see both sides of that. What I do notice though, compared to what you're like, and maybe you're saying the same thing, I've seen men and women in the same positions, not paid great, but there's a lot of extra stuff in those nonprofit situations that always gets expected and put on women, and women say yes to it because of, like they will take on the extra stuff, the extra projects. They will do the shit jobs. They will do the extra stuff. I see that as a subtlety too, that like tips the culture to not treat women or not have the same expectations that
Well, it goes
have.
back to the line, women have to be extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yes,
we
everything about that
be.
speech, everything about that speech is like coming back, and it's that subtle stuff. It's that subtle stuff. Like, be extraordinary. Don't be braggadocious. Like don't be vain about it. Right.
Yeah.
Like really fit in and don't take up too much space, but please do it all, and please do it really well, or else we will really point it out, and you still have to do it.
Right.
So
right.
Like,
still do all of it. We're gonna knock you down at every peg, but you just keep on keeping on. And the thing is, we can't. It oftentimes isn't coming out of fear or lack. It's because women can do all these things and can forge on because we've learned how to armor up, and so I mean it goes back to all of this. I again, trying to circle back to sort of the workplace,
Me Too,
the Me Too, the YouTube piece of this. I think it just blows my mind. I mean, I have 2 clients right now who have been harassed within the last few months. And one in particular, and I'm not going to share her name, but I told her I was going to tell this story. She was sharing with me that she was having a conversation. She was introduced to a gentleman from another woman in her networking group, a potential collaborator, referral partner. They got on a Zoom. So it's not even over the phone. Like they're literally looking at each other. And they're talking and they're seeing like they got this nice yin and yang going, and he brings some things to the table. She brings some things to the table. He asks her what she like, just kind of background information. Tell me how you grew up, blah, blah, blah. She shares that she's kind of grew up in a hippie household and like kids running around naked. And he immediately goes, oh, now I'm picturing you naked. And she was like, well, I was a kid. And then she keeps on keeping on, because again, she sees possibility here. This could be really fruitful and profitable for both of them. And they keep talking. And again, she's like getting through it, blah, 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 and thinking this could be good. And she says at the end, I see lots of possibilities here. And he says, but what if I fall in love with you? And she said, well, I guess we won't be working together.
I mean,
what the actual fuck?
You say what the actual fuck, but that is really familiar to me too. Like I feel like what she did there, we've probably all done. I've definitely been in situations like that when I was a nonprofit with donors that I had to like, take to lunch, or with potential clients, parents of kids I worked with. Like it's the weirdest thing where it's kind of like what I learned at Charlotte's age as a waitress. Like I can ignore it a couple of times until I can't. Then it's like I shouldn't have ignored it at all. But it's like like you have your eye on the prize. There's a goal here, and I don't want to halt everything.
Yes,
and I'm just it's so ingrained not to embarrass you. If you could like correct this really quick, but if you can't, then now you've ruined it. But it should have been from like why is it even okay for him to do it? It's so weird and so inappropriate, and yet so natural. I agree what the actual fuck, and yet it is so common.
So this is interesting because you and I, when we got off the Barbie in the Real World episode, and I said this on my Facebook page, like you and I were exhausted from listening to Charlotte. Even somebody who knew all those stories, to hear them in that short amount of time, I was just like, oh my God, I'm so tired. But we also got off of the call and you, again, right away, you were like, we need to do a part 2. We need to focus on this. And I was like, oh, I kind of thought we did. Because here's the thing straight up. I have not had that many experiences. My experience in life are far more common to what Charlotte goes through. I had a boss at one point who didn't know how to keep his hands to himself. And it wasn't just with me, it was with all the women. It was even with some of the guys. You know, he was handsy, as they say. But when I did not have an experience like my mom. I didn't have an experience like you've had. I mean, I just feel like you've had this way more than I have. And so so I think that's why I come from what the fuck, because I don't have the experiences. Memories don't come flooding back to me the way I think they do for you.
Yes. And yet when Charlotte was saying, people say don't engage, and you're like, no, you kind of have to, you kind of got it. Like, it happens to you now in LA. It does.
Right, but it
So you
happens
can
like the
relate to that.
catcalling thing. I'm talking about in a work situation.
Right. Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I have not had a work, and again, a good portion of my working life has been in a women-centered, right? It's not that women don't do it to women. They do. I know that happens. But I think because I have been working in women-centered industry since 2004.
Yeah.
I don't, and even that before that, my job right before I had Liam, I had a woman boss. So, I mean, I'm harking back, I'm going all the way back to 2000 when I think about that boss. So it's been a long time since for me to have that happen. And so I just feel like you have had, unfortunately, more experience than I have.
Well, yeah. And I think
want you to have
the worst and grossest was like at a restaurant where, you know, there's a bunch of male managers in a windowless office who just were so inappropriate and would say the most ridiculous things. And I would act like I didn't hear them, because I did like my job out in the front of the house, and I'd see people, and I, you know, when I was first a hostess, I mean, I was like 15, 16, the stuff they were saying and pretending, like, you know, like really gross stuff, like, you know, hitting under the desk, like, I guess to symbolize an erection. I don't know, you know, like stuff. And it wasn't just to me. It was it's just that I don't know if I learned it from other people, if I instinctually by that point in my life, like Charlotte knew, like, once you develop breasts, just men were going to talk to you, you know, like, and not the ones you wanted to, and never the ones you wanted to,
and not to your eyes, to
right. And so maybe by then I'd figured that out. I don't know. I don't really remember. I just knew early on, like, there was the way to, like, you know, get what you want is to steer clear of it, and also don't engage with it if you didn't have to. Definitely if somebody got gross, I would be like, fuck off. You know, like, this isn't okay. And I definitely reported people. So it's not like I took it in the teeth or anything, but in that situation, these are my employers, right? And it wasn't even just the stuff that would have made me feel unsafe if they weren't behind a locked office, but it was like the regional managers reminding us that even though we get to eat free, like, not to have too many, because we don't, you know, because we don't want those thighs to go to our fries, or those fries to go to our thighs. I said that wrong. Shoot. Edit that. Don't want those fries to go to our thighs, or, you know, like, that's shit. Like, just, again, the subtle things that other women that then make it okay to treat us like objects, that then make us feel, which then makes us feel unsafe. It is all tied together. At the end of that one with Charlotte, I was like, are these separate things? And I realized they are not, because that movie did it so well. There was the subtle things, and then there was the overtly, I feel very unsafe, where a man felt like, you know, grandiose, and a woman felt like this has an undertone of violence. The little stuff leads to that. And it's that othering, when you can belittle, when you can other, when you can diminish, you can then do anything, right? Like, you can, and it just becomes part of the workforce. Even the that little, like, when a woman tried to come up to those men talking, and, you know, and Ken was sort of like mimicking it, like, that is diminishing. And it's that I didn't have that as much. I literally had what your client had, where people would say things like, but do people tell you that your eyes are kind of distracting? And it's like, no, let's get back to this, you know, donation you're going to make, like, that kind of thing. And so those kind of things, like, you learn to move around. And I'm not proud of that, because is that the legacy that, like, my nieces and your daughter have, you know, like, should I have done more about it? Like, when I knew more, I certainly did, Absolutely. Did I come back and be like, not only do I not want to ever like meet with that donor again, I don't think we should even be in business with this person. Like, I have learned to shut that stuff down since I've been an adult. But as a teenager, I thought the smartest and best thing I could do was and just not engage.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, it strikes me as sort of a safety mechanism, right? Would it have been lovely to be able to engage or even deal with it the way Charlotte does now? Sure. Is it going to change everything? Probably not. Because it goes back to to me, we're putting a lot of gloss over with cancel culture and all of these, making everything equal. Not everybody is Weinstein, not everybody's Danny Masterson, not everybody's Matt Lauer. You know what I mean?
Thank God. Thank goddess.
God, yes, no kidding. And so if we equalize everything, then is it like, are we not doing anything? I don't know if I'm even saying this right, but I feel like, I don't know. I mean, it feels so systemic. I mean, again, and you said at the end of the last one too, like, systemic racism, systemic misogyny, the patriarchy. I see you wearing fuck the patriarchy.
You necklace. Did, you noticed?
I did notice. I was like, wait, what's that? I'm like, oh, I know.
I was 2 minutes late to meet you on here because I had to go put it on.
I don't know. I mean, I think, again, I feel like we're doing the best we can because we have to navigate. And yes, we can. I mean, think about how many women had to come forward and lay themselves bare for Harvey Weinstein to get any accountability. It's insanity. And Epstein and Lauer and Louis C.K. and just, I mean, the list goes on. And those are the famous people. What about the people that don't have that kind of availability? Again, my other client who ended up leaving a job because of the harassment, she went to HR. I'm sure there was a lot more behind it, but ultimately when she asked to stop reporting to this person, they said, no, you can't,
Yeah.
Like the little guy, the little us, the yous and me's of the world.
Right.
We don't have the money or the people we're talking about don't have the prestige to make it anybody give two shits.
Right.
So I don't know what the answer is, I guess, is my point. We're not going to solve anything on this.
Well, I mean, we're not here to solve. We're here to just, not just even commiserate, but just shine a light on it because I also had time to revisit Ashley Judd's TED Talk, which is so interesting because that goes into the online misogyny of just how differently women and men are treated out there. And again, othered in a way that makes it like just part of the culture to treat them differently. And again, do patriarchy smarter, right? But as Tarana Burke says, it's, I want to look at my notes on this because I feel like, what did she say? She's like, movement. What did she say about this? Movement creates possibility. Trauma halts possibility. Not every little moment like that is trauma, but it can be if it's, systemic and if it's over time and it like really keeps somebody in the position where they never have power.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe they got themselves in that position because they didn't recognize that they deserved better because of trauma. So trauma halts possibility. When we don't talk about this, when we continue to just go along with it, it halts possibility. A movement to talk about it, to recognize it, to have people go, whoa, that is happening. To have anyone listen to Charlotte and really think about that and go back to their own office and say, oh my gosh, we can't have 17-year-olds who don't feel safe on a subway or who feel like they have to be polite to a perv. Like, this is ridiculous,
Yeah.
And so I do think that's part of why we keep talking about it, not to just, it's not about whining and saying no fair. It is about saying enough. This is ridiculous. And we have to make it absurd that people like are okay talking about. I mean, didn't Elijah remind me? I don't remember who it was, but she definitely had a pod episode on her businesses as activism with someone who had a client. Didn't she interview somebody about this? She had a client and she was on a Zoom with them and she could see their chat and like they were sharing their screen and their chat was talking about her looks and really sexually,
Oh my gosh.
not just pretty. And she finally like said, I need to work with someone else there. I could be remembering this wrong. This could be something she reposted, but I feel like I want to go back and ask her about this. Anyway, she finally said, I won't, if you want to work with me, I won't work with these people because, and she called them out on it and they kind of, first rebuffed it and tried to minimize it. Right. And then they had to apologize. Somebody forced them to apologize and she didn't end up ever having to work with them. But like that takes guts because so many women will overlook that. It like your client, like at a certain point could not overlook it. Like this is ridiculous. If you're picturing me naked and you think you might fall in love with me, this is not going to be easy.
Yeah. This is not going to go well for you.
If you're actually already trying to see how professionally or unprofessionally we can interact, this is going to suck. But what I'm thinking is the more and more and more this is out there, the more absurd it can become. We're not going to solve it overnight and we'll probably never solve it. But if we can make it more and more absurd that, women don't feel safe at work or that women don't get treated the same at work or that women get othered at all, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think, again, Me Too, gosh, I mean, that was 5 years ago when this all started. And like anything, it's fallen off the radar. I think it's come back a tiny bit around with the Barbie movie, but for the most part, it's nobody's talking about it because Weinstein's in jail, Epstein's dead. Every once in a while, one of them pokes their head back out. Louis C.K. does a stand up and everybody gets all up in arms, but then it dies again, And so I think it's important to keep talking about it just because it hasn't gone away.
Yeah, this totally just makes me think about that. I think I told you I like sort of loved and regretted watching that Victoria's Secret documentary.
Yeah.
And it also makes me think of that song that Jax wrote that's just having this huge phenomenon, which is I Know Victoria's Secret. And it's just been so empowering for girls, for like little girls. And so great. And I think the rise of that kind of counterculture is so helpful. And I would love to like infuse it with even more attention because that was entire generations of women that were like being sold. And it was being run by men and like all the models that worked for them were talking about how, and the employees were talking about how the men that were running the show were berating them about how much they ate and about how they looked and it was just part of the culture. And to have that all exposed now is great, but to also learn how much that world was also feeding Epstein and vice versa, like is just realizing that like, oh my gosh, everyone who went into a mall and had a catalog didn't even know they were part of that.
Right.
And so to expose it doesn't make it better and doesn't undo years and years and years of trauma and abuse, but it's so great that little girls now are getting those messages that like, this is not what bodies look like. And this is not, and you don't have to look good for anyone but yourself if you want to, right? Like, it's ridiculous. And I do think that's part of what's going to help hopefully girls be like, fuck off. Why would you even think you could talk to me that way? Hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, so again, going back to my friend from college, and she said, one of the things Gen X did well is raise really strong young people. Yes, we have. She has. But there's a lot of, you asked Charlotte it straight up, like, is this still happening? I mean, Charlotte's been regaling me in the last week with some things that's happened at school of like, she had to interview for a class, another classmate. And, it went straight to like, well, if you need help with this, I can help you. And Charlotte's like, somebody asked her if she'd ever bench pressed, and she's like, well, I used to, but I feel like I need somebody that could spot me. Well, I can come over and spot you. Charlotte's like,
read the room. I mean, do I think people can still flirt? Yes, but like, how are they? Like, it's
But that's
not
just
always
it.
the
Like,
right.
so it's not, we can't say Gen X raised great Gen Z. We've raised great Gen Z, um, and I will say, Liam would be the first to tell you that when he was not great at the beginning, like his senior or freshman year in high school, like with the girlfriend he had, he's like, I made a lot of mistakes. He actually credits Irina to like calling him out on a lot of shit.
Came over
And
at the perfect time.
that's in 7th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that was just awkwardness.
Yeah. It went from awkward to not quite appropriate to better.
Exactly.
Yes.
To
That's
better,
growth.
it is growth. That is
But
growth.
I think that's you being aware. This has come up for me a lot lately, and you and I joke about it. We all love as Gen X to say our parents weren't hovering, like we're so proud of that. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of shitty, bad things happen.
Yeah.
And it's not our parents' fault. They just weren't aware.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's such a bad thing that we're aware. I mean, do we need to be hovering? No. Do they deserve autonomy? Yes. But I think we're so much more aware to help them repair stuff, to help them learn to be better. So I actually have like made a commitment to myself to stop participating in this. Like, well, when I was young, like actually some really bad, like I was inappropriately treated. I don't want to say like, was it sexual assault? No, but was it sexual inappropriateness from like someone else's kid to me when we were all kids? Yes. Nobody, like no one was around to protect me for that.
Yeah.
That happened a lot in our generation,
Yeah.
So that's not good. So thank God, like we watch out for more.
Yeah. But I just think there's, I am hopeful after listening to Charlotte and being around her guy friends. I am actually hopeful that because they're not building the callus, right? I mean, Charlotte knows what to do, but she's doing more than you and I did at that age, right? So she's not going along to get along, so to speak. Her guy friends, I mean, she talked about this at the end, but I mean, really, her guy friends are constantly like, when they walk with her to the train or whatever, they are floored, and they don't just go, they don't blow it off. They're like curious about, like, that's what you go through, so I am hopeful somebody like Liam who will admit he wasn't great, and then he listened to what and watched what Irina was going through, and he made changes. I just I
when
hope there's a lot of them.
When Peter was on that, do you remember he was on that freshman council thing in college? He I don't know if you remember that. Like, they had to deal with a number of, they weren't all, but mostly like happened to be fraternity cases of sexual harassment. Like, and one of them was like on that council, that freshman council. And Peter had already been through this with female friends in high school, like aware, just shocked and aware, like when he like could see things through their eyes, he just couldn't believe how much they could walk through the same experience so differently. Like that was just sad and bizarre to him, and he couldn't believe it. But when he was in that situation, he was so angry at how this person was even getting an audience to defend themselves. Like this many people reporting, why is this person even still walking around on this campus? Right. And so like the privilege that give people even the voice and the microphone, which never happens in the reverse, which like we still are in a place where the victims get paraded out and the victims like have to go through the ringer to get any justice. That we're still so far from that, because that was just 2 years ago, right?
Well, what about the guy from my hometown, that swimmer, Brock? What the fuck?
Right? Oh yeah.
I mean,
right.
They didn't want to.
Poor guy.
Poor guy would ruin his college career.
Yeah, and like what women have to go through still to like, it barely seems worth it.
Yeah.
So and yeah, same thing with my youngest. Totally floored. And I think I mentioned in that episode that when he said that is uncool and stood up for a good friend of his, he got called a simp, which he's like, I'm fine, whatever, I can take that. But that is, again, that comes to like what we wanted to get to, is a big piece of changing this is how we raise men.
Yeah.
100%. Men raising men and women raising men have a big job.
Yes.
And we didn't even touch on all the ways like women make it worse for women. And that's another
Mhm.
pod. But like, you know, again, there's all these subtleties and all these, like, there's this, what's at the center is like patriarchy, misogyny, sexism. And there's all these spokes that go out in these ways it gets its tentacles into Charlotte's experience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot to unpack here. And I think this will be an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So,
and I'm happy to be talking about it. I'm happy to be awake. Like, it was depressing as shit when we finished recording. Like, it was great. And I felt like it's so important. And then I just wanted to cry.
Yeah.
And
no, I agree.
right now I feel very fired up and happy to keep this conversation going. The more we can keep people aware and looking for it, perhaps the more people start to make it absurd. That's my wish.
I love the idea of making it absurd, because it's the sense of like, this is so stupid. This is so prevalent. And how again, in 2023, is this still going on? Is it as blatant as being shown porn like my mom in the 90s? No, but the subtleties are even worse. Again, because I think it's the death by 1,000 paper cuts. You know, you don't even realize how you got there until you're at the traumatic place. And
that did you see the Sex Lives of College Girls? Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen that show.
That happened in it, like where she went to go work with someone she really admired on a paper, and he had porn on. He wanted to show her something, and he was showing her porn. So it's like, maybe that still does happen.
But I think, again, to your point, you know, if we want to, as we say, we're still living our best lives, we're still living, the best chapters are still in front of us. And it's clearly still happening to you and I anyway. We can't be silent about this. We have to keep putting it at the forefront. And it comes to the point of like, I still think there's an aspect of women keeping it to themselves for exactly the same reason Charlotte said, which is they don't really get justice, you know, and it's so traumatic to have to keep living it over and over again. And if you're not going to get justice anyway, so I guess my part of my why for this is letting people know we see you.
Yeah. We see your shit and we see you, and you don't deserve this, sister.
Exactly. Fuck you. And I'm so sorry.
Yes. And we can do better. We can do better for you. Totally. We can shine a light on this. Totally. And to the point of making things absurd, I like to remember that weirdly smoking wasn't as absurd once as it feels now. It's not happening. In fact, it's had a resurgence, but at least there's a lot more awareness. Drinking and driving weirdly should have always been absurd. Yeah. Or illegal, or like wearing a seatbelt. Same with some of the movies that didn't age well.
Oh my God.
So I can only hope that like we can channel this in that direction too. Yeah. Sadly, we also live at a time where we feel like things are going backwards. So it's time to stay vigilant. We can have the best time in our lives by staying vigilant, because we don't give a fuck what anyone thinks.
Right. That's where our superpower lies. Yeah. You know, I mean, I suppose at any moment we could, get
my jar of Fox.
Bottle of Fox, jar of Fox. You know, at any moment we could get backlash. We don't know who's listening. We don't know who's listening to these pods. Yeah. We're nobody famous at this point. But yeah, I mean, we could totally get lambasted at some point.
Yeah.
And bring it.
Yeah, bring it. I got your back.
I got yours too.
Thanks. Awesome.
So should we quote?
Song. Yes.
Song? Okay. So I picked Bad for the Boys by Alex Cameron. This actually was shared with me by Liam. It's a great song, probably very Gen Z. I don't know too many people would know Alex Cameron. And what I like about the song is when you start listening to it, it says, I never thought I'd feel bad for the boys. And so at first you're thinking like, oh, he does feel bad that guys are going through all this. But then at the end, he's like, actually, I don't feel bad for the boys. So the chorus changes, but here's the lyrics I like. here come the grammar police, here comes the PC brigade, and here comes the mattress on the floor from the bed you tried to get her to make. And now you're living little lives without women and blaming them for all the change. You thought the boys were going to stay the same, but no one cares about your good old days.
This is super interesting because, again, a whole other episode, and we are gonna talk about Gen X and Gen X men in particular, but there are so many men out there who maybe didn't enjoy that movie because they feel like this is not their time and they do everything wrong and they're the bad guys, and it's so sad because they're really missing the point, right? Because it wasn't meant to be that way. And so they could hear this being like, yeah, like, well, I can't say anything anymore. Like, first of all, fuck you. And but second of all, like that, like you're invited to help make this safer for your daughters and your sisters and your mothers, and you're invited to be part of this. This isn't about like you can't say anything. This is about making sure everybody gets to like have power and privilege to advance and be seen and all of that. And so yeah, it would be so sad for someone to listen to this and be like, oh, a bunch of women whining. Like, yeah, because again, that's because you're the problem.
Right, exactly.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, I'm the problem. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's what you said in the pod. Like this isn't about men versus women. This is about working from the inside to understand how patriarchy and misogyny does no one any favors. And if you as a man or a woman is feeling clutching your pearls over all this, then I'd go take a big fucking look in the mirror and see who you are. Because if you're clutching your pearls over goddamn Barbie movie, then you are the problem.
Yeah. Or feeling like women need to shut up and take it. Then, then you are the problem. It's true. Yeah. So
no question.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that well, that's what we got about that. And it's so funny. Again, we're going a little behind the scenes. Normally we record 2. We're not recording 2 today. I thought I wanted to, and then all of a sudden this morning I was like, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about this. I'm going to be tired at the end of this one. I can already tell, and I am. Yep. And even in the discussion where you and I we're on the same page, like it is mentally and emotionally exhausting to think about this because it does feel heavy and big and can feel impenetrable. Like, yeah.
Well, and it doesn't just, I'm not re-traumatized talking about it. I've done work around this but I do like feel as you do, like we hold a lot of really sacred space for our clients. And honestly, like if this movie or this conversation has anybody feeling a certain way about it, reach out to one of us, please. Email us, reach out to either of us. We're here for that. Like we have held so much space around this that of course it's exhausting. Like, it is, there's just echoes of generations of pain around this. And so, yeah, we can.
Because we're not even talking about what our we're talking about our moms, but generational trauma is real.
Yes.
And we carry it in our DNA.
Yes. And we're all here again. So Charlotte can go further than us and vice, and not vice versa. And so on. Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's why it's exhausting because there's miles to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is an Iron Woman. It is not a sprint. It is not even a marathon. We got lots to do.
Yeah.
Well, if this one felt important, if this felt like something that a friend, man or woman, that they should listen to this would be another one we would love for you to share. If you are having feelings like this is an important conversation and you want to review it, that would be great. Because we're not going to shut up. We're going to keep talking about this.
And
maybe not till next year.
And all other kinds of juicy things. So stay tuned.
We got lots of fun stuff coming too. So,
Yay.
Well, as usual, thanks for listening to The Things We Know, and we will be back next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.